Hey guys, welcome back. Gift here again today. Whether you're rendering, editing, or just playing a game, if that CPU is getting a little toasty, I'm going to share with you how I have chosen to cool mine off. Let's get into it. If you enjoy hearing about PC gaming hardware and tech, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and turn notifications on. That way you can find your way back for the next informative video. Although Ryzen CPUs aren't known to run extremely hot, and as you can see here, one of my backdrop stays for a long time has been the Ryzen Prism CPU cooler. The two together just weren't a great hit for me. Even though I was only running a 5600X, I was consistently getting temps in the mid 70s during gaming sessions, even with that noisy cooler cranked up to almost 100%. What did I choose to take the place of the underperforming Prism cooler? You already know, the Noctua NH-D15S. The slightly smaller brother to the awesome D15. But because who wants one fan when you can have two, in addition to the 140mm fan that's included in the kit with the D15S, I'm adding an additional 120mm Noctua fan to sit above the RAM. And to go with that, we needed a splitter so they could both plug into the CPU header. And I know there's lots of folks out there that have enjoyed tan and dirt colored stuff over the years, but I was not one of them. So when Noctua went to the chromax.black, I picked up everything in chromax.black. In case you haven't used a splitter on a fan before, this lets you plug into the PWM connection for both fans and then run that up to the fan header on the board. You'd expect nothing less from Noctua, but the packaging was airtight, no room for air, and absolutely everything showed up in perfect condition. You simply could not have asked for better packaging from Noctua. Both AMD and Intel CPUs are provided here, the mounts for both, the standoffs for both, and you even have the thermal paste included there along with the special screwdriver. If you happen to be running an Intel CPU, you will need to use the support that's going to go on the back side of the motherboard. That way the cooler has something to attach itself to. Regardless of your motherboard, you have instructions with pictures and everything is crystal clear. I have spoken to people in the past that feel like Noctua may be slightly overpriced for what they're delivering. However, I really feel like when you look at their attention to detail, their overall performance, and their durability and reliability, you're getting exactly what you pay for with Noctua products. How many times have any of us who have built or modified a PC opened up a box and literally had all the parts in there as a jumble and had to go back and sort the screws, the bolts, everything that came with the case or the CPU cooler and figure out where the parts were before we ever started the installation? As you can see, the beast itself here. Now, this is exactly what it comes with out of the box. You get the 140mm fan, the cooler itself with the 6 heat pipes, and all the attachments you need for multiple motherboards, along with the thermal paste and the extended screwdriver that you're going to need to attach this. Something to keep in mind here, and why I ended up going with the D15S instead of the regular D15, is the height. This one measures 6 mils shorter. And in my Cooler Master NR600, it looked like it was going to fit on paper, but when I measured multiple times, it looked like it would actually end up right up against the glass. It is kind of nice with the D15S because not only do you have that extra margin if you don't have as wide of case and it won't fit inside of the panel, it's actually a little bit further removed from the GPU, and if you have an M.2 drive in that first slot, it gives you a little space above that. Not that those things are necessarily needed, but it does give you a little wiggle room inside the case. When you talk about heat transfer from a CPU, you want it to leave the integrated heat spreader on top of the CPU and make the jump into the cooler. Well, when you have just the pipe sticking out, it can be kind of hard. It's not a very smooth surface. You have to use a lot of thermal paste just to get a decent connection. When you look at how smooth the plane is here at the bottom of the cooler itself to help heat transfer from the CPU to the cooler, that by itself is almost worth the price of admission. This is what we're replacing here, guys. This is a Ryzen Prism cooler, and it did an okay job, just nothing to write home about. Remember, it's only sitting on top of a 5600X CPU, so not a really hot chip to begin with. And like I said before, under gaming load, we were well into the mid 70s, so it wasn't doing a really great job. And I'll be honest, it was noisy as heck. Here you get a good idea once I took out the Ryzen cooler. You can see what I'm talking about on the left there. There's 4 heat pipes, and they're actually exposed. There's no kind of base to tie them together. And you can actually run your fingernail across there, and you can feel the connections of where they've kind of soldered them all together. And it's just not that smooth of a plane. Inversely there on our right, you have the Noctua, and it's literally as smooth as a mirror. Talk about a great area to have to pick up heat and transfer it up to the 6 heat pipes and the huge towers above that. A little bit of a close-up here of what you're looking at with the Ryzen Prism CPU cooler. Now, this cooler came with the 3900X, so that was not an inexpensive CPU, even when I bought it a year or two ago. And it's not that great a cooler. So remember, one of the things you may want to think about upgrading along the way is your CPU cooler. Even if you're running a 6 or 8 core CPU, it's never too early to think about lowering those temps. To borrow a phrase from NVIDIA, if frames win games, then mass generally does a better job in the thermal wars. You can see here just the actual size you have. You have more heat pipes to help move the heat along to the cooling towers, larger cooling towers with more fins to help dissipate that heat, and a much bigger stock fan to help drive more air through the cooling towers. When you look at the size difference and the construction difference between these two in this picture, you see why box coolers are really a last resort. They're going to be put in there by the manufacturer at the lowest dollar amount possible just to give you a cooling option out of the box. You can see here one of the reasons you may always want to think about a D15S or one of the other smaller cooling solutions from Noctua is that no matter what, you're never working with a lot of space right on top of the CPU. The RAM needs to be close to the CPU so they can talk to each other very quickly. That's never going to leave a lot of space, along with the VRM cooler sitting right there also. So one of those things you may want to think of if you really want to try a Noctua product is going for one of the smaller coolers instead of opting for the D15 right out of the gate. Pro tip number 1, if you're working on an AMD motherboard, do not take off both sides of the bracket at one time. As you can see here, the right is the old bracket that came with the motherboard. The left is the new one from Noctua. If you remove both at one time, the backplate will fall off the motherboard. Pro tip number 2 here is you can see right in the center in the circle, the nub is not present. That's because I installed the bracket upside down. And honestly, I got both of them installed upside down. So even somebody that's done this a number of times, if they're not paying attention, can make a mistake along the way. Example A, both brackets installed in the right hole for AM4 and both of the nubs facing down towards the motherboard. You'll see why that's important in a moment. As you can see here, you do have to remove the fan before you install the coolers, and the spring-loaded screws are already attached, which is terrific, and those screws are what clamp down on the nubs on the bracket that attach directly to the motherboard. As you can see here, after several minutes of fiddling around, I realized it was upside down. I went ahead and flipped the brackets over, and there you can see what the tower is actually attached to. Here we finally have the brackets correctly installed with the nub facing up. The curve is going to face in on an AM4 motherboard, and you're going to have the screws that actually attach it to the backplate on the innermost holes. This is how you can see the actual attaching of the towers down to the bracket. And let me tell you, compared to some of the other brands on the market, this is one of the easiest attachment systems going for large air coolers. Because Noctua is Noctua, and I realize they charge those couple extra dollars, but one of the things you get are the long-handled screwdrivers specifically tall enough to clear the towers and let you screw down the bracket. I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong way to do it, but obviously I installed the cooler without removing the motherboard from the chassis. Compared to what we were looking at before with the Ryzen cooler, obviously the Noctua cooler dominates your computer, and I gotta say, I love the Batman Black look. Whether it's case fans or CPU cooler fans, usually the side with the sticker on it is the side where the air is going to be moving to. The other thing you can look at is which side is the cable attached to. That is also usually the side of the fan the air is coming out of. I've installed these coolers or similar ones a number of times, and this is the only tricky part, is getting the fan clamped onto the tower, because you got to get that little attachment bracket around the fins. Obviously the one on the bottom is pretty easy, but the one on the top, you want to be careful because you have your hand in there between the top of the case and the fins of the cooling tower. In case this is your first time, you do want to make sure the fan is up flush to the tower. You want a very tight fit, and you want to make sure the grommets are on the fan that sit up against the fins of the tower. That way they'll reduce any vibration sound. I am one of those people that likes to keep their CPU and GPU cool while they play, so why not have 2 Noctua fans? Because that's always got to be better than 1, right? So here you see a 120 mil fan that I'm going to put on the front tower that's short enough to sit on top of the RAM. Along with the D15S, you do get the wire bracket to attach a second fan. you do have to buy the fans separately, but this is how you would attach them to a fan to put above the RAM. You can see right there next to my thumb, I don't yet have the rubber corner protector on. I do on the other side. You want to make sure you get those on all four corners so the fan doesn't vibrate or rub against the cooling tower. I realize this picture is a little bit dark and hard to see, but I moved that 120 mil fan all the way down on top of the heat spreaders so that I could get it lined up with the cooling tower. This is where your Y bracket comes into play. You're going to take those outbound cables from both fans, attach it into your Y bracket, and then you can attach that to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. And voila, this is the finished product. The D15S, the 140 mil fan in the middle of the two towers, and a 120 mil fan on the front of the leading tower sitting on top of the RAM. That way, both the towers can get a substantial amount of cooling, keeping that CPU cool under load. I don't pass any kind of judgment for folks that build their own PCs. I've seen some awesome looking PCs with loads of RGB. However, I prefer the basic black approach. I like that kind of like Batman, blacker is better kind of look. And I like how they've done this here. And they've even removed the serial number from the top of the 140 mil fan, so you don't have to rub that off with rubbing alcohol anymore. As you can see here, when I get the computer button back up, you have a little bit of breathing room now. Now, I didn't go with the D15S over the D15 to necessarily give me clearance around the GPU or the M.2 drive or things like that, but it is a little bit of an added bonus, just a little bit of cooler air able to move all through the case. But remember, I really got this because I didn't feel like I had enough room between the top of the cooler and the fan, and when you buttoned up the case and put the glass back on. Here you see my entire gaming rig right before I button it back up and fire it up. And I know I do have the fans there for the case that are Noctua and the Noctua CPU cooler itself with the extra fan. And collectively, I have spent a couple $100s on all that. But to me, it's been money well worth it because you have a working, simple, eloquent solution that keeps everything within good temps, and it has never let me down, and it's certainly not as loud as stock coolers or fans tend to be. Down in the description, I'll have links to all the products we talked about today. And I'm sure I sound like a little bit of a Noctua fanboy, and in all honesty, I probably am. But it's one of those things where I've not found a better solution out there. Is water going to be a little bit quieter? Yeah, probably. But I tend to move things around enough times that, this is just something that works really well for me. And I enjoy the quietness of the overall computer. And it's never let me down. So for me, it's been good money for the value that I've gotten for it. And it's probably one of those products I'm going to keep using. As always, I'll be down in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Are you already a Noctua user in one of your computers or all of your computers if you're like me? Or have you gone with water? Or do you just stick to the box coolers because you don't see the value for something like this? If you made it this far, as always, thanks so much for watching the video. A like and a sub are always appreciated. Until next time, guys, good hunting and GIF out.